Greetings, clickers, and welcome to Board with Video Games, the gaming podcast that strives for the right balance of coverage for the games you play on your table and on your television. You can think of us as the Joel and Ellie of gaming podcasts. We're a proud member of the PSVG Podcast Network, and I am one of your hosts, Kyle, and joining me on this co-op adventure, the guy who is the spunk to and wit to my dry seriousness. Josh, how are you doing this evening?
I'm good. Spunk has such a negative connotation here that
Does it really?
Yeah, it's okay though. But it's another. I'll tell you later. It's another word for.
Okay, I was just thinking something's like spunky.
Family friendly? Is that?
I mean, we're family friendly, so maybe we'll worry about that later. But
listeners, if you know what spunk means, tweet at us.
Well, I mean, I think I know what you're talking about, but I'm talking like someone who's spunky.
Spunky,
you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm spunky.
Okay.
I definitely am spunky for sure. I definitely don't put too much thought into the things I say before I say them. So I am definitely the counterbalance to this.
Well, I sometimes, okay, you're right. My show notes are pretty thorough usually before we start podcast. That's true.
And I do put thought into what I say, but usually I say what's on my mind, even when it's not appropriate, hence the spunk comments.
That's right.
Also, I have never played The Last of Us.
Oh, really? Well,
but I will say this. I'm a huge Naughty Dog fan, and I love Naughty Dog for their narrative.
Yeah.
I watch a series on YouTube from the React channel where they do like teens or kids or adults play video games. I watched the entire playthrough of like 6 or 7 different teens play through the entire game of Last of Us.
Oh, wow.
And the DLC. So I kind of got this really cool experience of seeing everyone else's emotional reactions to different parts of the story. So I know the story, and actually it still makes me want to play the game. So actually, most games, I think if you know the story, you're a little deterred from actually going through and playing it. So I think that says something about the game. But it'll be something I do play because I know that you can get it remastered for the PS4.
And it is on sale right now for $9.99.
Oh, now maybe I'll get it tonight.
So there you go. It is
That's a good price.
Yeah, absolutely. $10, and it comes with the Left Behind DLC. So there you go. Awesome. Hey, but we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So, hey, everyone, thanks so much for joining us this week. As always, if you have any feedback, questions, suggested topics, hit us up at Board with VG on Twitter, or check out the awesome stuff that Josh posts over on Instagram about all the awesome games he's playing. You can also find us on Facebook now at facebook.com/boardwithvg. So feel free to give us a 5-star rating over there because we're 5-star worthy, aren't we, Josh?
Sometimes I don't feel like it, but today... Yeah, I feel like I'm 5 stars.
I love the confidence. I really appreciate the confidence you got going on. Also, if you want to communicate in a more long form or narrative way, you're welcome to do that. Feel free to email us at boardwithvg@gmail.com. I shouldn't say at boardwithvg, just boardwithvg@gmail.com. We'd be happy to read whatever you send us. Hey, if you have some sweet fan fiction that you wrote about a board game or a video game, maybe if it's good enough, we'll even read it. We'll act it out for you. That would be a lot of fun.
I won't read your fan fiction.
Why? I didn't say mine.
Now yours. I'm talking to the listener.
I want to read their fan fiction. So, hey, please send it in.
Address to Kyle.
So, as always, also use that hashtag Board with VG so we can follow you on all the social medias and see all the cool stuff you're playing. This is going to be a bit of a different episode. As we announced last week, we have a very special topic that we're going to be focusing on this week, and that is violence in games. So what we're going to do is actually talk about what we've been playing on the table and the television first at the top of the show here. And then the last half, 2/3 of the show will all be focused on the topic. So, hey, from a format perspective too, if you like that better, let us know. That is something that we potentially could do moving forward. But, let us know. Right now, we've been splitting things half board games, half video games. We've been told that, from a guest perspective and things like that, it can be challenging if somebody isn't into one of those two things. So if you like this format better, let us know. Maybe we will stick to it. Let's see what happens. But hey, that's enough housekeeping. Josh, what have you been playing on your tabletop, sir?
We can't have any guests that don't like video games and board games equally. I forbid it.
Okay, well, hey, I will pass that on to the powers that be. We will see what their response is, but I will let them know that Josh forbids it unless you love both equally. Not even 51-49. It has to be 50-50.
I know, because I love board games more, so I can't be a hypocrite. I'm not gonna. We didn't get any games to the table, so just because I feel like I don't want to worry about time too much today. I will say I did finally pick up Onitama because I had a 10% off or 15% off coupon at Barnes & Noble.
Did you just get that coupon in the mail or did you get it in your email?
I got my email.
Okay, because I just got the mail coupons and there was no like board game or like general like just off your purchase ones, and I was bummed.
Really? Usually it's like a 20% off one in there.
I know, and there wasn't this time. I was really bummed about that.
That's a bummer. Yeah, that's a bummer. So yeah, we didn't play any games. We had a crazy hectic weekend. But I'm pushing to get Stuffed Fables to the table Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, or Monday. I'm going to be home until next Tuesday, Wednesday. I have jury duty next Tuesday, so I may have extra time too. So I'm going to try to make some time to get Stuffed Fables. One, because we both have it. Two, because people have been asking us about our opinions on it. And three, because I've been dying to play it since we got it, and it's just sitting there like mocking me. So that's my lack of board gaming story for this week.
Josh, this is gonna be really disappointing to all of our listeners because my wife was at a work conference for the last week and got back Sunday, and has been under the weather since then. So I actually haven't played anything on the table either. She's been, like I said, my wife is definitely my board gaming partner, and the person who definitely beats me a lot at board games. But because of that, I was like, hey, I'm going to set some time aside. And this weekend, I focused a lot on learning rules for games, including Stuffed Fables. So Stuffed Fables has the priority of getting that to the table. Our plan is to play it tomorrow. That is the plan. So I'm confident, hopefully, that we can get that going and at least have something to talk about there. But yeah, it's one of those things that's really interesting that, for board games, I'm always like, this is great. We can play these things together. And then when she leaves for a week, I'm like, oh man, what am I going to talk about now? Because I could play a game solo, I guess. But when it comes to solo gaming, for me, that's why I have video games. So I played a lot of video games, but I did not play a ton of board games.
Don't feel bad. Between the two of us, we've covered 40 board games already since we started.
That's true. So I won't feel bad about it. And I know we've talked about way more just in random passing. So I do feel a little bad though. I feel that obligation, of like, hey, I have to play something new every week, which for board games is going to be tough. I've done a pretty good job of like continually pulling new stuff out. However, my backlog of board games is far less than my backlog of video games. And as we were talking about off air a little bit earlier, board games are getting really expensive, it seems like. So Edge of Darkness is now on Kickstarter and is $100. There's the new Batman Kickstarter that's up now, which is minimum of 140. Is
140 and 320. Those are your two options.
Yeah, like games are getting, and granted, you might play these games multiple times over many, many times over many hours. But that was a conversation I was having with my wife of like, this game is $320, which the minis look great in the Batman game. Like the sculpts look really nice. Like things look good. But I'm like, I don't know if she's going to like it. And I have no way of knowing until I drop the money on it.
You don't even know if you'll like it.
That's true. I don't even know if I'll like it.
That's a big gamble.
Right. And especially since this is, if you're not familiar with the Batman Kickstarter that's going on right now, it is a Kickstarter exclusive game. This will not be in stores. This is the only way to get this game is through this Kickstarter, which may or may not ever happen again. We don't know.
Right.
So, it's interesting. But
go buy a 4K TV instead of getting this Batman game.
That's
what I did.
I was thinking about the fact that I could easily, I already have it, but if like somebody didn't, you could go buy like a PS4 or an Xbox One and like The Witcher 3 and have like 300 hours of content for like less than the price of that Batman game.
Yeah.
So, which is just crazy to think.
More power to him. I'm such a big Batman fan. It's really killing me that I can't back this game, but I got a kid and responsibilities.
And we're clearly in the minority because they are making a lot of money.
Yeah, I know.
Well over $1 million at this point. So
I could try to get at a board game exchange in like 2 years when people are bored of it.
That's true. When they are bored with their board game. So, Hey, okay, so that's kind of a bummer. We haven't been playing a lot on the table, but Josh, have you been playing anything on your television?
I have, um, I talked about Recore last week, and I
Mhm.
realized I kind of just had the assumption that people knew about it. And I thought that might not be necessarily fair because I really just said because it's like what, a year and a half old game, but
Well,
for
I thought
people with Game Pass, it's relatively new.
was it 17 or 16 that it came out?
I couldn't. I think it was 16, like the end of
Oh wow, was
16,
it
like
really? Because it was
November.
like I feel like it was a September game, but I
Yeah,
can't remember what year it was.
yeah. So I think it was 16 because we
Almost
had we had Horizon Zero Dawn in the beginning of 17.
right.
So it
I
was
will look it up
16.
while you talk.
Actually, I have it on here.
Oh really?
September 13th, 16.
Okay.
I didn't think to look.
Oh, there you go.
Because I pulled up the story's a little convoluted, but I wanted to make sure I covered it. So the story tracks Joule, Joule, uh, as in electricity, uh, Adams, one of the first volunteers for the utopian colony of Far Eden, who wakes up after centuries in cryosleep to find that nothing has gone according to plan. Her dad is kind of like this guy who created this utopian society, or what he thought was going to be. She's like a tomboyish, engineering kind of girl. She like dresses like how you would imagine like a stereotypical um, uh, girl or woman who works in like an auto mechanic trade.
Hmm.
Kind of like that aspect of things. Um, and she has these things called core bot companions. You start the game with a dog, and what a core is essentially it is exactly what it sounds like. It's an orb though. It's like a glowing orb. Different colors are represented in the game, and the world is now inhabited by robots that run on cores, and you run into small robots and even like scarab type robots that have tiny cores in them, and then you run into giant boss fights who have huge cores. And as you collect cores, you can level up your companions, who also help you fight while you're traversing this desert. A very beautiful looking plain desert, but it looks very good. And the Xbox One X enhancements are noticeable, which is good, which is a positive. Um, and you basically start exploring from there. They do call, or what I would call a crypt, they are called dungeons in this game. So it'll tell you like leaving dungeon, entering dungeon. So it doesn't try to hide the fact that it has um, um, it's like a Metroidvania, Mega Man kind of game.
Hmm.
The combat style is a little bit more similar to what you would imagine a third person Mega Man was like, not a 2D side scroller. Because you do have a gun that you can charge. And you can, as you progress through the game, you can unlock new abilities for your gun that give it different. Uh, I'm kind of blank on the word, but basically, you start off with a base gun, and then you can switch it to a red beam, which is what you would use against red bad guys, and then eventually
Mm-hmm.
blue and yellow. Uh, there's lots of puzzle solving. The mechanics are very good. There's a dash, you have a double jump, lots of climbing and adventuring. It's basically um, like a Lara Crafty kind of game,
Hmm.
which isn't a bad thing. It's somewhere like of a hybrid between the Renaissance of Tomb Raider and again the games of like old. So like it's a little bit in between there. Um, the combat's fun. It doesn't feel like it is kind of um like what's the word I'm thinking of that RPG players use all the time.
Grind?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm just off.
Is that what you're thinking of or no?
That's exactly what I was thinking
Okay,
of.
I was like, I don't know what we're going for here.
Just spaced. It is a grind a little bit, but it doesn't feel like it. It's so fluid, and you constantly have multiple bad guys on the screen at the same time, so it's hectic. It's a lot of movement. and it's very easy to left trigger will lock on, and if you just tap the right thumbstick, it will change targets for you very easily.
Mm-hmm.
So easily that you can kind of just lay fire onto everybody, not necessarily killing them, but and then if you damage a bigger, not a boss, but a bigger bad guy enough, you can interact with like a little mini game where you shoot like a grappling hook into the core of the bad guy, and it's like a little mini game of trying to pull it out, and you get more resources from those bad guys, and eventually you go back to what I call the sand crawler. It's not really a sand crawler. It's like her little crash ship, and she has like a mechanics bay in there, and that's where you can level up your companions.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of cool, if you like dogs, it's really kind of cute and fun when you can like change the body shape of your dog Corbot companion, the head to look like a dog's head. The body even makes like robotic barks. It reminds me of like the Robo Sapien dogs that came out in like Toys R Us like years ago. But I mean, it's a super fun game. It didn't get a lot of like it's rated pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a 63 out of 100 on Xbox. It got a 58 out of 100 on PC for Metacritic scores. But that being said, there aren't a lot of reviews, and most of them I'm pretty sure were when the game came out, when it was like marred by like terrible loading times.
Right.
And but that being said, they're long loading times because it's loading pretty much the whole game world for you. You don't have to do much else loading until once the initial loading is done.
Mm-hmm.
But they have since remastered it. That is the version that's available on Game Pass. It's like a $20 game now, even if you bought it outright. Well worth it. I'm loving my time back in it. My wife was like, watching me play. She's like, "Didn't you play this already?" And I was like, "Yeah." But I only played it for like 5 or 6 hours, and like then I kind of dropped off the radar, and I traded it in actually, and because I got it on a Black Friday sale. So I'm enjoying my time revisiting it, and I think I'll probably keep playing it until Sea of Thieves comes out.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll try to play something new for next week. Kind of looking
plenty of that Game Pass library you can play.
Game Pass. I'm looking at Final Fantasy that I just picked up. I'm also looking at Evil Within 2 that I just picked up. And I might get into some more Forza Horizon 3 because we have yet another PSVG convert, and Devin, that Ninja Dev, got onto the Xbox. So
he threw away his PS4.
He's going to stop talking about it. I can tell you that. He has so much to talk about now. But that's me talking about an old game. What do you got?
That was a really good segue. But I'm going to ruin your segue really briefly because speaking of talking to your partner about games, it was funny because before we recorded tonight, I was talking to my wife because, as listeners know, I'm a huge fan of Overwatch, and this week they've been doing a whole bunch of teasing about the next hero that's going to be announced. Okay. And it's looking like it's going to be Bridget, who is Torbjorn's daughter, the god daughter of Reinhardt. Probably going to be a tank, like all this stuff. So I'm explaining all these really cool things to her, and she's being very patient with me and very nice and being like, "Yep, that's cool. Yep, that's cool." And I was kind of explaining it, and then she was like, "Well, what's the difference between like, like a tank versus or whatever?" So, and because she's watched me play a decent amount of Overwatch, and I was like, "Well, a tank player is like this, blah blah blah." And then you have like, your DPS characters like McCree, and she's like, "McCree, he's like the cowboy guy with the 6-shooter, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Yeah, you really suck at him."
Wow. Oh,
and I was like, "You are correct. I do. I am not good at him at all. That is 100% accurate. Thank you for pointing that out." Like, I was just thought it was really funny that like she remembers like from watching me play one of the few times I've ever played McCree, which probably was like in Mystery Heroes. And she's like, "Yeah, you were really bad at him. Thanks. I love you. That's great." But anyway, I was feeling really restless with my games. We're kind of between competitive seasons right now for Overwatch. I've been playing Persona 5 still, but I was just looking for something a little bit different. Something that like I kind of almost wanted that comfort food, and not in the sense of like it made me feel good, but kind of in the sense of something I knew what the experience was going to be like, and I knew I was going to like it. So I was flipping through my library of things, and I kept coming back to and hovering over The Last of Us. And I was like, you know what? I think it is time to play this again with all the hype for The Last of Us 2, with everything that's going on, which I know that game is still, 2019, 2020. But I was like, I feel like I really want to slip back into this. I played it once. I've never done it again. I really want to, have this experience again. So I booted it up, downloaded it, booted it up. Man, the first 20 minutes of that game just get me every time. Like, I don't even have kids. And like that first part of that game just destroys me. And I was, like I had mentioned that my wife was gone. So I'm sitting in the basement playing this game, crying, literally crying, and like hugging my dog because I'm so sad. Like, I was like, this is so horrible. But man, I just really enjoy this game, this world, the characters that are in it. Naughty Dog does so many things right. And I thought it was kind of serendipitous that I started playing this game. And then we're going to talk about violence, because this is a dark, gritty game, and it is parts of it are gruesome. Like, it is really a violent game. But it's one of those that I'm so fascinated by the world, because I'm not usually a person who even I'm not a huge horror movie fan like I used to be, but I just really don't. I like suspense, but I don't like slashers and like movies that are like gruesome for the sake of being gruesome. Like, that's just not my thing. Which, if people like it, that's fine. But despite all of that, I'm just really interested in this world and how we got here and these characters. And I'm really happy to be back playing this game again. Hopefully we'll finish it up still this week, because obviously it's not a super long game. But really happy to be back, really happy to be replaying it. Obviously, if you haven't had an opportunity to play it, I mentioned it before, it is on sale on PSN right now for $9.99. If you've never played it, easily, I think this is an easy recommend, but just recognize it is dark and it is gritty. There's some weird control things too with it that I just was never able to get over. Like, to reload your gun when you're not aiming down the sights, you hit R2.
Really?
Yeah, so like you pull the right trigger when you're not aiming, so you have to like aim down the sights to shoot. So it's just like there's just weird things that I remember the first time I ever played the game. I got really confused about like how to reload. I was like, how do I do this? I can't remember how to reload. So I just always used all the bullets in the clip, and it would automatically reload for me. But yeah, so there's some weird things there. But what I will say, offsetting that, I am really looking forward to playing Moss on PSVR. The game is downloaded. It is ready to go. I just haven't had a chance to jump into it yet. Obviously, you folks may remember Quill from E3 last year, who is kind of, for me at least, the star of the show. I've been really looking forward to this game, and overall, the reviews have been really positive about it. Like, really the only knock on it is that it's not long enough, which, I'm kind of okay with, especially in VR games. People talk about how they don't have these really big, long, robust experiences in VR, and I'm kind of cool with not having big, long, robust experiences in VR. I like my PSVR. I still play it pretty regularly, but I'm cool with playing it for an hour or two or putting it down, or finishing a game in 3 or 4 hours and being done. Like, I'm totally okay with that and that experience right now. So looking forward to playing that and hopefully reporting on that one next week.
Do you have Rick and Morty VR?
I don't.
That would be the first thing I would buy if I got a PSVR.
Yeah, I'm not a big Rick and Morty fan. And I say that only because I've never watched it. So maybe I would like it. I don't know. I've never watched it. I don't know. I'll say sometimes Rick and Morty fans drive me a little crazy,
yeah, well,
but
they don't represent the
I know.
well.
I know. I'm just saying, but that actively turns me off of the show.
It's a bummer. Watch it. It's very smart and it's very funny.
Yeah, I've heard great things. I've heard really, really good things about
very
it.
Well written.
But all right. So when we recorded the show last Tuesday, and obviously we release on Thursdays, but when we recorded last Tuesday, we had decided beforehand that we wanted to do a show about gaming and violence. We felt it was time for us to start jumping into some deeper topics and kind of treading into waters that sometimes podcasts just avoid because they really want to talk about all of the fun. And we want to do that a lot of the time. But sometimes, we hit points where it's like important for us to have topics of discussion that might be a little harder, might make us think a little bit, maybe are a little more hard hitting, but we hadn't had any prep time. Like, we talked about it a little bit before the show. We're like, hey, in order to do this justice, we want to put some prep into it and think about it a little more. Well, unsurprisingly, after the events that happened at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, a few folks, including the Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin and President Trump, pointed the finger at violent video games as one of the causes. So we decided we're going to jump in, and actually we had kind of decided before they had said anything, but we were like, hey, we're going to tackle this topic and talk about it together. Now, a few important clarifiers we want to put out there before we have this discussion. Number one, we are not experts. So the easy follow-up question to this is then why do it? Like if you're not an expert or you don't have good information to provide, why do it? Well, to be frank, it kind of seems that the idea of having nuanced discussions has fallen by the wayside. Things are either great or they're horrible. Things are right or wrong. Good conversations can be really hard to come by, and we think that it would be nice to bring that back and have conversations about challenging topics and be able to talk about them together. So that is one of the reasons that even though we're not experts in this area, we think we can hopefully have a good nuanced discussion about it. Also, our goal is not to be political here, but obviously that comes with the caveat of, we're not here to push a certain agenda or idea, but obviously topics like this cannot be 100% devoid of politics. Our goal is not to change someone's mind. Our goal is not to tell you how to think. But obviously, when we're sharing our perspectives on things, they might come off that way. That's not the intent. We're just sharing what our thoughts are and kind of how we think about things. You're welcome to agree or disagree. And we hope that once this is done, if we did a good job or not a great job, that you let us know and you give us that feedback about things you thought we did well, things that you maybe disagreed with and felt that we didn't accurately represent. We'd love to hear that information from you. And finally, Josh and I have not talked about this at all beforehand. So I have no idea what he's going to say or what his position is. He doesn't know my ideas or position. I've been doing some research and reading some articles and things like that because I work in higher ed and I'm kind of a nerd. So I've been doing that, and I've been doing that for a long time, but I hadn't in a while in preparation for this. But we just want to have a genuine discussion. So I'm not really certain what Josh is going to say. I have no idea what direction this is going to go. I don't have any notes. I just have kind of what I remember off the top of my head. But with that, Josh, where do you want to start about games and violence?
Well, I'll say ditto to what you just said. Does that cover that?
Yeah.
I think we can have a conversation about this and keep it lighthearted, and we can have fun talking about our opinions. I don't think it has to be, as it's not life-threatening to us talking on a podcast. Unfortunately, it's a little different for people living the real life situations that it's happening in. But I think that you kind of hit it like kind of our preparation styles at the top of the show. Like I thought about reading up on stuff. I can remember so many things from growing up and where this kind of all evolved or devolved from or to. But really, it's just been talking to people that I work with and people I see and family members and unfortunately, it kind of ends up becoming a political topic. But I really feel like we can avoid politics in general. We don't have to talk about the NRA and all the stuff that's going on right now with sponsors and all that, because I don't think that that's necessarily important to the topic. But that's just me and my mindset. If I had to pick somewhere to start, though, I would say maybe we should start with who the people are that are saying these things and why. And I'll tell you my thought on that. And it's almost too simplistic. The people who are out there talking, not even name dropping anybody, who are saying that, in my opinion, that they're saying that video games are either responsible or partially responsible for these violent shootings or pretty much any violence. They don't have experience with what they're talking about. They're out of touch with that topic, in my opinion. So you have someone coming out who has never played a quote unquote violent video game saying that this is why it's happening. And I don't even necessarily fault that person, because when a tragedy happens, people, when they try to understand what happens, it's the things they don't understand where they put the blame. So if I'm a 55-year-old senator in any state and I've never played Grand Theft Auto and I've only heard the negative things about it, or I haven't touched a video game ever. The last game I played was Mario. Maybe I don't understand where that's coming from. And people seem to be so quick to look for a reason why something happened, which I also don't blame because people need to cope. That's they're not, I'm sorry, but we live in a country where no one's going to blame God. No one's going to blame guns. That's just where we are. So what they're going to blame is something they can't explain or something they don't have experience with, in my opinion. So when someone says video games are the reason, I can't discredit that because I don't have any science or proof, or half the time you don't even know about the person who committed the crime yet. All you know is that said person was a teenager, or we found their room had a Marilyn Manson poster in it, or, you know, whatever the case may be. That's where, without, I could just keep going. So like, just having said that, like, I guess I would say I'd be interested to hear what you think about just that and kind of in general.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to push back on you a little bit.
Sure.
I think there are plenty of people, probably more than ever, but there are plenty of people who are blaming guns. And like I said, we're not going to have that discussion today.
People are blaming guns for sure.
You know,
yes.
But it is interesting because I feel like generationally as a society, especially, again, I have no idea. I don't get to look at our podcast analytics. I have no idea how many international listeners we have. But in the United States, obviously, there tends to be this idea that generationally, like, we think our generation always has it right, or we're the ones who got it right. The generation before us was too rooted in the past, in tradition. They're not, I don't want to use, I struggle with using the word progressive because people will tie that to politics.
Right.
But they're not progressive enough. They're not pushing the envelope forward enough. We did it right, and the group after us is pushing it too far the other direction. You know, so like that tends to be how we kind of think of things. And I think that when you get to people who now are representing us wherever they might be, whether it be state, federal level, you're very right in the sense of like they don't necessarily have the experiences of like what we had. They're the generation behind us, so they look at the things that we do as being pushed too far and that they had it right. And I don't think that's wrong because I think we're the same. I'm probably the same way. Like 90s music is the best music that exists. If you disagree with that, I'm sorry, you're wrong. That's just the way it is. And, you know, a lot of it comes from the developmental imprints that are left on us, you know, in our teenage years, which are really important and kind of shape who we are. Like we might change and grow, but like, you know, I still remember the first time I listened to like Metallica's Black Album, you know, like I still have memories about that because of the age I was when I was introduced to that. So I think that kind of, like you were saying, fits into this whole thing of there is a lack of understanding. And building off that, if you are someone who has never really played video games and you watch, you know, one of the scenes from GTA 5, I'm thinking specifically of, is it Trevor who does like the torture thing?
Yeah.
Like if that's all you ever see, I mean, I can understand the context of being like, well, clearly that's probably not positive. It's probably not giving a good impact on our youth. So what's the other chance that it's going to do? Is it a neutral impact or is it a bad impact? Like what are those are kind of the three options, right? It's either good, bad, or it does neither. And if you see that, probably your reaction is going to be it's bad, right?
Right. And then you also have to look at the implications of, so look at how you look at our country, look at how the United States treats violence and nudity comparatively in film and what is okay and what is not okay. So you have to be 18 to be able to see a naked, any human being. You have to be at least 16 to see a butt, hashtag butts. And for violence, it's pretty much tolerated from 13 plus, even sometimes less than 13 if there's no blood. Mm-hmm. So for me, I always have a problem when I hear people blaming video games. And for me, it goes back to me thinking they blame them because they don't understand them.
Mhm.
because not everyone has seen a movie in their life. Well, okay,
I mean, probably, yeah.
that's a
I
very bold
generally,
statement to make.
it's a little
I
hyperbolic, but yes, in
I'm
general.
going to imagine most people have seen a TV show or a movie that has shown violence.
Mhm.
Not everyone has played a video game, but a lot of people have. But not everyone has played a video game that depicts the type of violence that people are associating with violent crimes.
Right.
I don't think anyone looked at a Goomba as getting crushed by Mario and tried to jump on their friend's head to see what happens.
Mhm.
Maybe someone did. Maybe like I could picture like Kevin Austin doing that to somebody, but that's just like I think that that correlation is, you know, if you like stigmatize something to such an extent in certain media or certain ways of viewing things, you can't. You're part of that culture. You're part of creating, saying that this is bad. Which, if you're a kid and someone tells you no, or don't, or this is bad, what's your first inclination? I'm not trying to rewrite everything, but like, there's a lot of cultures out there who don't treat nudity anywhere nearly as bad as violence. It's quite the opposite,
Mhm.
especially in like England where there's nudity on regular television there, and they have their cops, their police officers don't have guns, so it's a very converse like lifestyle people are living. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the numbers on violent crimes in Europe versus us because I don't know them, but I kind of just feel like that kind of ties into the whole kind of topic.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense because obviously we're focusing on video games, but in general, you know, these comments that have been made are not focusing 100% on video games. It is
Right.
also movies. It is also music. It is also these other things we consume and the impacts that those have on us. And I don't think I've ever talked about it on this show, but like I did used to work. Believe it or not, there are still places in this country you could rent movies.
No.
You live in the Midwest. There's actually kind of a lot of them, and actually, I live like a mile away from one right now. And I used to work at a video rental place just a couple of years ago as a fun side job that I had that I really enjoyed doing. And the question I dreaded the most when I was working was, is this movie appropriate for my child? Because we would
Right.
get that question all of the time. Almost every Friday or Saturday night, a parent would come in, they're having a sleepover, so they would have their kid and all these other kids with them. And they would come up, they'd pick out some movies, and they'd walk up to the counter and say, is this movie okay for my kid? I hated that question because number one, I don't have kids. I have no idea contextually like what is okay or not okay for kids. I don't pretend to know. Number two, every parent's different. So what and who am I to like say what I think is okay for your kid? And then if you're like, well, if I'm like, oh, this is bad because of X, and you're like, no, I'm fine with X, have I just judged your parenting hardcore in front of
Yeah.
everyone?
Yeah.
So I really didn't like that question. So what I would do instead is instead of saying, hey, I don't know, instead of saying whether it's appropriate or not, I'd be like, well, here's what's in the movie. And invariably, I would always start with, if it was a movie I knew well, I'd be like, oh, like this violent scene happens and this violent scene happens. And then there's this violent scene. And almost 100% of the time, the parent would interrupt me and say, well, no, I know that. But is there any nudity? Are they going to see boobs?
Right.
Like almost every time. And I was like, no. So I guess fine if that's what your thing is. And like I said, I'm not a parent. I have no idea what that's like or how you manage that or what's more or less important. But I always thought that was very, very telling that the question was never about how much violence is in this thing. The question was about is, my 14-year-old son going to see, again, now I'm putting some very strict gender.
Spoilers, your 14-year-old son has seen nudity.
Probably, more than likely, yes.
Spoilers.
But I always thought that was interesting, and kind of the way that we thought about it. So a question I have for you, sir, is have you ever heard the statement, because I see this on Twitter, I've seen it multiple times. Have you ever heard or seen people who work in gaming or people who write about gaming or anything like that make the comment that there has never been a study that supports that video games lead to violent behavior?
Yeah, I mean, you see it all the time. Well, I mean, you see it if you follow the right people, or you see it if you listen to podcasts or things in general. So, I mean, I've definitely heard it before.
Do you believe that is true? Do
I
you
mean,
believe that is accurate? I should say, do you believe that is accurate?
no, I mean, I'm sure there has been studies, but I don't necessarily know that I've ever seen results for them. But I also haven't, gone out and looked.
Hmm.
I, I mean, you can't. There's no way you can't do a study and find what you're looking for in results either, though. If a company who is very against violence in games or nudity in games wanted to find a demographic that showed that it was affected by it, they would do as many test groups as they needed to prove their point if they had an agenda. Now, if you're an unbiased study, maybe you get 4 out of 5 dentists to prove this toothbrush. But if you don't want 4 to 5 dentists, you can make a legitimate study that shows 1 out of 5 dentists doesn't. So I don't put too much into that, but I also don't want to take away from that. Like someone put time and effort into that.
Okay, so then here's going to be my other question for you. And like I said, if you want to go a different direction at any point, let me know. So if you're like, hey, I think research probably exists, but I don't know if it's reliable. If you are, an elected official
Mm.
who has some responsibility because we've elected you and appointed you, some people would say you have a responsibility to ensure the safety of our folks, of our kids, us. How do you make a determination if there is actually like if violent video games actually have an impact? Like, how do you, if you are in a position of power right now, what do you do? What do you say? Not about all the
Well,
other stuff, but specifically about this topic about violence in games.
I'll paraphrase a powerful person in our country. We should probably get a rating system for something like that. I mean, there's no good answer. This comes down to if people want to blame video games, which they're entitled to, it doesn't. It comes down to the same question: is how did a 18-year-old kid get this gun legally? Well, how does a kid get a video game he's not supposed to be playing happen? So, and it goes right back to your, like, I worked in retail. I know your movie question because I worked at Blockbuster. I also worked at Best Buy and Toys R Us. I know can my grandson play this game? And it's Grand Theft Auto 4.
Can they play
And
it? Absolutely, they can.
but what
Should they? I don't
right.
know.
But what they do is not every parent or not every grandparent, but they already know the answer in their head. And then they take you on their own little road to get asking you questions that will give them the answer they want. So if they ask you a question about a game, you give them an answer that they don't like, they go, oh, well, but what about this? So they ask you questions until they get the answer they want. And then they either say to little Kevin, yeah, okay, we can get it. Or no, we're not getting this. Didn't you hear the man? He's the one who said you can't have this game. So, I mean, I think that it comes down to the parents. Like, if video games are violent, where do you draw the line as a person in the government or a person who controls things? Where do you start to say this can't be a thing that is allowed? Or I saw this study, but I didn't look at these studies. Or, to imagine any kind of like situation that you want, but it's not even I personally, I can't even blame the game because the game isn't if it has an M rating on it. Do I want to believe that Rockstar is making a game for adults and that's it? Yeah. Are they making a game that's geared towards kids? Of course they are. There's just pictures of Ryan Reynolds in Children's Hospital in Deadpool outfit giving them bamboo katanas. These are children who should not, by the rating system, have ever seen his movie, but they have. I'm also
I
not
mean,
going to sit
admittedly,
here.
a pretty good movie, but
Yeah, and it's a great movie. But when I saw that in theaters, there was a row of 8 preteen kids in front of us with one parent, and you knew that that one kid convinced his mom to tell their parents it
it's
was
gonna be
okay.
fine. It's gonna be great.
So like, and I'm not going to sit here and tell people how to raise their kids either, because I have a soon to be 1 year old, and my wife and I haven't had that conversation yet, but I can tell you one thing in my mind. He's going to be able to see nudity way younger than he is going to be able to see violence, in my opinion. I mean, and that's a whole nother thing with the prudish culture, but like, that's a decision you have to make
Mm-hmm.
as a human being, whether you have a child or you're responsible for children, one way or the other.
Right.
You have to make a decision on what you think they can handle. And some kids, regardless of whether they have a mental disability or not, or if they're mentally deranged, which I hate when they throw that out until you know for a fact that they are.
Right.
You don't know how someone can handle something, let
Mm-hmm.
alone. I watched the second Halloween, the second Rob Zombie one. I couldn't handle that movie. There was some stuff that was in it was too intense for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a limit for me. Like any
Right.
Eli Roth film, I don't need to see it because it's violence for violence sake. So I don't know. I just took you down a huge long
No, that's
tangent,
okay.
but
That's good.
would want to know your answer to that same question or that same thought.
Okay, well, I'm gonna nerd out for a second if this is okay with
Please
you.
do.
Okay, so just a little bit of background. I have a master's degree, which I'm not trying to be like, oh, I'm so smart, blah blah blah. Just saying that like I've had to do like research that fits the academic rigor, that I've had to create my own studies. I've had to do all of these things. So when it comes to people quoting studies or saying, oh, this study says, or this study says, or there's never been a study that, I right away am always super skeptical about what that actually means. So if you ever hear someone say, well, there's never been a study that says, video game violence leads to, increased aggression or increased violence in kids, that is just wrong. That is 100% not true. There have been many studies that have shown that. Now, the thing you have to question, though, is the quality of those studies, right? Because one of the common things that you'll see if you go look for studies, and an important thing to know about this is that this is very, very different than like global climate change, right? Global climate change, the scientific evidence is overwhelming, like well over greater than 9 of 10 survey or studies done on it show or support that global climate change exists. Sorry if that's political. It's just the scientific fact of how things are going right now.
Right.
When you look at games and violence, though, there's no overwhelming majority of science. There are a lot of studies that have been done that say, yes, exposure to violent games increases aggression in children. There are also a lot of studies that say, nah, not really necessarily. And there's a lot of things that are important to keep in mind. They say, oh, it leads to an increase in aggression. What does that mean?
Right.
Like, because you have to measure that. So there's got to be some sort of scale. So if it's a 100-point scale, like, was it a 1% increase or a 50% increase? Like, what does that mean? And is that it led to an increase in aggression 1 minute after they finished playing? 10 minutes, a day, a week, a month, a year? Like, what is that? So, like, that's my struggle with when we hear about these studies, is that there have been studies that absolutely 100% support it. There have been studies that say, increase playing violent video games increases aggression. It decreases their ability to empathize. It decreases their ability to build connections with people. It actually impacts their friend groups, because even if their friends don't play violent video games, because of the way people who do play them interact with their friends, impacts those friends and the experiences that they have. Like, there's a ton of things that say that, but then there's a lot of them that out there that say, well, yeah, but you can't, just because there is a connection here doesn't mean it's caused by that. So like, maybe you can't control for every factor when you were doing this game. And interestingly enough, the study that I've read that has shown to have the greatest increase in aggression in people after playing games, you know what it was about the game that made that increased their aggression the highest?
No.
Bad controls.
Yeah.
Literally the whole point of the game was like the controls would stop working or would not work as they were explained.
Yeah.
And that, like, the increase in aggression of those people after completion of that game was higher than people who've been playing violent games.
Which is just common frustration more than aggression, right?
Absolutely. So that's where I think it's a little bit hard to be like, when people are like, no, none of these studies exist. Well, they do. The question becomes, how quality are those studies? And there actually was a really interesting article that I read that talked about how the worse the outcome for games, i.e., if a study was done and it said, hey, games are really bad, there is a significantly higher likelihood that those studies would be covered on mainstream news, even if the quality of the study was lower. So really, really interesting to think about that. Folks are hearing these ideas of like, oh, wow, the games are sound really bad and they're doing really horrible things. But then the actual quality and the validity of the study that they're quoting is not as good as other studies that are showing less bad impacts or even positive impacts. So it's kind of an interesting little thing when you really start digging into it, that yes, the academic research is out there. There are a lot of people who are talking about these things. However, it's hard to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff of like, what do these studies actually mean? What does an increase in aggression or violence mean? How do they define that? Like, how long are we testing them afterwards? And most of the studies that are quality, that have high rigor to them, that have are maybe doing things double blind, like are really taking the extra steps in order to ensure the quality of the data that they're collecting is good, even say, well, we studied this after a day or a few hours or immediately after, but we have no idea the long-term effects of what is going on. So it's a very slippery slope and a very hard thing to know. And I think that's just one of the things to kind of keep in mind in general when it comes to looking at research studies or hearing studies, whether it be about violence in games or anything, is you have to question, what does that actually mean? Because yeah, it's really easy to say, yeah, I read the study and it said that, playing violent video games leads to increased aggression in people. Sweet. That doesn't really tell me much of anything. So yeah. Correlation is not causation. And I think that's one of the things if you do research, you hear all the time. Yes, you might be able to correlate violent video games with, increased aggression. That doesn't mean it causes it, though.
Yeah.
Hey, so we have some comments from some folks on Twitter that I want to kind of jump into here quick. We're kind of running a little low on time, but I want to make sure we get these in since people were happy to share. Splig at Dopalicious on Twitter said, I'll try to read this as best I can. I copied and pasted it. I don't know if I got it all. But they talked about, we just kind of asked the question of like, hey, what are your thoughts when it comes to violence in video games? Do you have thoughts on it? And Splig said, mind-numbingly easy executions of Shadow of War. Another thought, there's no moral code in games, GTA, with parents less involved and kids spending so much time in game. When do games need to be more responsible than a rated M versus their rights to free speech? That's a super loaded statement, I feel like. Josh,
right. Yeah, that was the second part of his tweet. So his first tweet said,
oh, thank you.
Yeah, I used to be staunchly opposed to the idea that violent games affects you, but as I've aged and thought about it, the violence I grew up with playing is totally different from what kids have access to. Having entered a code for Blood, Mortal Kombat on SNES versus mind-numbingly easy execution. So, so I will say this: I was caught off guard by the end of his statement.
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
I don't support anyone's rights of free speech being taken away at all. I think whenever we run into a situation where someone feels their rights of freedom of speech are being imposed upon, it's because the context isn't being understood correctly on one side or the other. In a debate that is now like directly tied into the Second Amendment, like that we're starting to find all these different ways to be worried about such and such a thing. I think that if they want to change how the rating system works, that's the way you're going to address that, not by imposing on someone's freedom of speech. So if people don't think that M-rated games are rated properly, which is also why we have an NC-17 rating,
AO for games,
an AO for games.
Yep.
Then if you think that that needs to be changed, I'm on board with that. But you also have to remember, gaming is as big of a corporation as film, and if they think they're going to lose money by changing their rating system, let's not forget that they also are donating money to political campaigns. So you will always have someone who is looking out for whoever is deemed the bad guy at the right or wrong time.
Well, yeah, no, and I think it's easy to forget sometimes that the reason this rating system exists is because in the early 90s, there was concerns about video game violence. There was hearings on Capitol Hill. So the ESRB is like, hey, we're going to come up with a rating system just like the movies have that we're going to slap on games so that parents know. Parents have an awareness of what is good or not good for their kid to play. Now, I think, would you support, because right now, like, those aren't really legally binding. Like, depending on the state you live in, the state may or may not in any way enforce that. Do you think it is appropriate for it to be legally binding that you cannot buy an M-rated game unless your parent buys it or you're 17 years old?
I mean, much as I don't like the idea, I mean, there was a time I was ID'd when I was trying to buy games. Mm-hmm. They've obviously gotten more lenient on that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you need to be 21 to buy alcohol and you need to show an ID, if you need to be 18 to buy cigarettes or whatever the age is now, then, if that's one way to do it, I support it. It's not hurting anyone. And I think that's, for me, the most important question to ask is it hurting someone? And do I think if you need to be 18 or you left your license at home that day, go buy it digitally because you'll still be able to do that.
It's very true. Because as far as every video I've ever watched on the internet is concerned, I was born in 1901.
Yeah.
But I get definitely what Splig's getting at here, though, because, right, like, who does the responsibility lie with parents? Because that's the thing that we often hear in these situations happen. Like, where were the parents? Mm-hmm. Where were the parents during these things and all this good stuff? And I think, for better or for worse, like, our economy is different than it was, right? It's very, very hard to make it on, and not saying it has to be the guy working, but like on the single income, like stay at home mom idea of the 50s and 60s, like that doesn't really exist anymore. Like most folks can't make it on that anymore. So, you have daycares and babysitters and both parents working and kids are involved in a whole bunch of activities. So at the end of the day, everyone's tired. Part of the reason we don't have kids is like, I can't imagine in the life that I live right now, I'm way too selfish for kids. Like, I could never, maybe it'd be different if I had a kid, but I also don't want to find out that I'd be a really horrible parent, like, because if we had a kid and I was like, oh crap, I'm still super selfish, like that only hurts the kid. Like, that's not good for anyone. So I think I would never say that games should be able to exist in whatever form they want to. I'm a big, big proponent of art is art and it can be whatever it wants to be. And again, part of that's my upbringing. My parents were very, like, I could read whatever I wanted to at whatever age. I could watch whatever movies I wanted to at whatever age. They didn't care, so it's easy for me to be like, well, I worked out okay. Right. But obviously that's just my story. Not everyone's story is the same as that.
And not everyone should be treated and raised the same. It's just not how people are.
Right. Another response that we got was from Guts17 on Twitter, who was replying to Splig and us, and he says, or they say, I say if you don't support it, don't buy it. I'm a parent that lets my kids play anything I'm playing. I've never seen a correlation between the violence in games and that of my children. I have 4. And I think, again, not telling people what they should do with their kids. I'm venturing to guess that potentially could be because you're playing it too. Like you're probably
Right.
having conversations about it. Like you're probably interacting together while you're playing this game. I don't know. I have no idea. If I had to guess, that would be my hypothesis as to why that's going well.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. I mean, you know, we said it a dozen times already, but I mean, there's situations where he could be playing, letting his kids play games he doesn't know about, but it does make it a lot harder when that kid has a question
Mhm.
to get an answer. And I'm glad, you know, he represents that that group of parents who do things like that, and he represents the type of parent I want to be. Like, I want my kid growing up playing board games and playing video games with me. And
Mhm.
that's what I did when I was a kid. My parents woke me up at midnight because they made it to Bowser, and because you couldn't save the game, so
Right.
they played all day, and they woke me up to let me see them beat the boss. I
Right.
played Tetris with my mom. Now, when I was growing up, we didn't have. I mean, I grew into Mortal Kombat as it came out, but I was a
Mhm.
teen when it came out, and that was a game for me. And the real world has blood, and that game tried to portray that. So,
Mhm.
you know, if I ever had any questions, I'm sure I could have asked them. But I think that's great, and that's his choice to do that. And I know friends who have a family who is very close knit, and they don't want their kids experiencing too much of the world because they're afraid of the world.
Mhm.
And that's their decision, whether I
Yeah.
agree with it or not. So, but if they told me I was a bad parent for letting my kid play a video game that they didn't approve of, I think that's where we start to run into everything that's really happening right now with our country.
Yeah, I do think it's an interesting thing. I mean, another game that I'm playing right now, or just finished up, and now moving on to the second one here is Bayonetta, and it was interesting because I was talking on the Nintendo Shack about this. That there's a lot of concerns about Bayonetta, but when there's a concerns about Bayonetta, it's usually about the sexuality of Bayonetta and how she is, and kind of how that game is. And it was interesting because it's the first time I ever showed it to my wife. I showed it to her. I'm like, "What do you think of it?" She's like, "Well, yeah. I mean, she's like, the Femme Nikita type, like, you know, person going out there doing their business. And, she's pretty sexy and she flaunts it and uses it to her advantage." I'm like, "Well, there are a lot of people who have a problem with that." And she's like, "I find that interesting." She's like, "Because I'm surprised more people don't have a problem with the fact that she's killing a whole bunch of angels.
Yeah.
Like, that is what she's doing. She's murdering angels. And no one seems to say anything about that. But everyone's like, oh, well, she's spins around in her hair that's her clothes now becomes a weapon, so she doesn't have any clothes on for a while. But that's what, again, whatever is going to work for some people. I just think it is very interesting how we prioritize. But I think we've also gotten to a point in our country where we realize there's something wrong. Like, clearly things are not going um, the way we would like them to, or how we envision when we think of America. Things are scary right now in a lot of aspects, right? Like, um, if you look at when research picked up into video game violence, it was after Columbine.
Yeah.
Like in the 90s, there was some research going on, but after Columbine is when you see, if you look at the numbers of research that's published about it, it just goes through the roof because everyone is grasping for straws. I don't think there's an easy answer. Might video game violence be part of the answer? It might be. Might it not be? It might not be. But I think we're at a point in our country right now where everyone recognizes that there's a problem, but no one, I genuinely don't think anyone knows how to fix it. Like,
No,
I
I
don't
don't.
know
I
if
don't think.
anyone knows. So we're kind of grasping at straws saying, well, it must be this, or it must be this, it must be this, because the first thing we're going to do is grasp at the things that we don't understand, because that's what we do. We're like, I don't get this. It seems bad. It must be because of this. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know that. But I feel like that's a lot of what's happening right now as we're
Well, yeah.
grasping at straws because we know something's wrong, but we
Yeah.
don't know how to fix it.
If you look at just real quick, like if you look at that kid who was swatted and the cops killed a guy and it was the
Yep.
wrong house,
Yep.
the guy had never played a video game in his life,
Yep.
and he got shot unarmed.
Yep.
So you can't like. There's just these situations where I know that doesn't correlate into video game violence as far as that situation goes, but it stems off of this fear that people have of this video game culture.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you have these terrible things like Gamergate that don't help these situations at all, where it basically brings to the surface the worst of the worst people in our culture and our little gaming environment. So I think you're right. There's not ever going to be an answer, because just like in a study, you can go into the gaming world and you can find as many bad guys as you want because they exist. But
Mm-hmm.
there's equally, if not more, good guys in that world. And it's just like going into a bar and you could pick out the bad guys from the good guys. They're always there. It's just kind of unfair to label, in my opinion, it's unfair to label a whole, I don't know, what would you call it? A category, a subset, entertainment industry, whatever you want to call it. It's unfair to categorize video games as the cause of a mass murder or violence in general. Now, I say this now, but you know what? Maybe scientists, maybe doctors do find a link, because I don't know how the human body works. I don't know how we take in and translate violent images in video games, and I especially don't know how we take, like when you said it kind of desensitized people and like remove some empathy. I mean, I get it. It makes sense when I hear it. Can I empathize with that? No, I can't. Because if anything, my empathy has risen exponentially since I've been a kid and playing games. I'm way more empathetic to people's, lives and things like that. So, I mean, you're crying at a video game. I'm crying at commercials. Like, there's empathy to spare. So I don't know.
Well,
we'll never find an answer to this.
And I think one of those things that's interesting too is that, in those studies that they talk about those things, like they also tend to talk about how like people who tend to play violent games or prefer violent games also tend to have maybe less social connections. So it's like, well, okay, so then is it, which causes which? I don't know, and again, that's not every study that says that. And that's what I think makes this so hard, is that there is not a clear answer. There is a lot of gray and a lot of conjecture and a lot of hand wringing and a lot of pressure to feel to do something. So you take the thing that supports what you think is going to be supported by the most people. And if you're somebody who's played games your whole life, you push against that because you're like, well, I'm great, so there's no way that can be right. And if you're someone who is looking for something to explain it, you're like, hey, I don't play games. That looks pretty bad. That must cause, like, how can that not cause people to react in violent ways? Yeah, it's a complicated, multi-layered situation. And unfortunately, Josh, I don't think we solved it tonight.
No, it doesn't. No. You know what? We could be making so much money if we could solve this problem.
It's not about the money, though. It's not about the money.
Well, I mean, I would like to be financially stable for the rest of my life.
So, I mean, who wouldn't?
It's a little bit about the money.
No, who wouldn't? So, okay. Well, hey, everyone, thanks if you stuck out through that conversation. We're running a little longer than we usually do. We really appreciate it. Like I said, let us know your thoughts on video games and violence. Did we say something that made sense, that you're like, oh, that kind of resonates with me? Or do we say something that you're like, hey, that is completely bunk. There's no way that's true. Let us know. You can tweet at us at Board with VG on Twitter. Or if you're like, hey, I want maybe a little anonymity, I don't want people to kind of know everything that I'm saying, or you have much longer feedback to give us, feel free to go ahead and email us, boardwithvg@gmail.com. We'd love to hear what you have to say, kind of your thoughts on everything. And I just want to point out really quickly, too, that it's not just video games. Really, really very briefly, obviously, we talked about the Kickstarter for the game Hate that was there. And Hate very clearly says there is a mature rating on it. It says this game is only for folks 18 plus. And the byline basically says, the world of Hate is brutal and is recommended for mature audiences only. The art of the game depicts acts of extreme violence as well as nudity. To survive and thrive in this barren wasteland, you'll need to embrace the savagery of not only massacring your enemies, but taking innocents captive, torturing them, and even feasting off their flesh. You have been warned. It is not a world for the faint of heart. I will tell you, I have no desire to play that game as a result of that description. However, I'm cool with that game existing, you know, like, but I think that's the important thing to note too, is that like, and we didn't even talk about the fact of why movies tend to get a pass over games, because in games you're like actually the person doing it, like you're actively involved and engaged, whereas movies you're just watching. Whole different thing. We've covered a lot of stuff. Josh, hey, thanks for having that conversation. I appreciate it. Should we wrap this up and get out of here so that we don't get yelled at for being already 10 minutes over?
For sure. They better not yell at us, because we had some co-PSVGers go over too. Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm glad we ended up being on pretty much the same side, because I was like going into this going like, oh boy, I wonder if we're going to be on opposite ends of this.
But what side are you even on a side?
No, but we have the same mindset, I think, for the most part.
Right.
I'm not saying like if you're threatening to take my games away, I'll get my AR-15 and do this. Like, I'm not like crazy, or don't impede on my rights. Like, some people. I'm sorry, the internet has changed me. Some people are like that on the internet. It drives me crazy. You can't even read intelligent tweet and scroll through the comments without me get like Randy Pitchford, CEO of Gearbox, was getting attacked over his personal opinion. Leave the guy alone. It's his personal Twitter account. Yeah. You know, he's not speaking for Gearbox. He's speaking for himself. Like, people, everything is so toxic right now. That's really what I was afraid of. The two of us having different opinions and creating a toxic environment, which we didn't do.
Well, I'm a little hurt that you think I would try to create a toxic environment with you.
Not intentionally. I don't think.
Well, and even if we disagree, you know what? I'm going to find something we disagree about, and we're going to have a conversation about it one of these podcasts.
There's plenty we disagree on, I'm sure. We'll find something.
I actually don't know how much we disagree on.
It probably won't be video game or board game related. I'm sure
that is probably
TV
true.
Or music related.
Oh, that is true. That is probably true.
I'm not gonna out myself right now and tell everyone the music I hate, because then everyone else will just hate me. So I'll skip my shout outs. I just wanted to mention Alexander Xterm 1337 on Instagram asked if we could tell him the name of our intro song for Board with VG. It's so goddamn epic.
It is epic. I don't know the name of it, and I could look it up. I got it off of a royalty-free website where I paid one fee for it, and then we get to use it for, not in perpetuity, but like for a year, as many times as we want to. So I don't remember the name.
That's okay. Don't tell them now, because you just said we only have it for a year. We don't.
Well, I can renew it in a year. And anyone can use it. You might find another podcast that has the same song.
Yeah.
One podcast that I listened to actually did something similar, and then that same song, I think it was like 5 Hour Energy or Rockstar or some energy company, ended up using that same song in like a national television. and the podcast was like, what the heck? We figured like this song would never be in like a national ad, because like it costs like $10. Like, what are you doing when you're paying for national television commercials and using like a $10 song? Like, what are you doing?
Nice.
So
awesome. Yeah, that's it. So I mean, Alex, you'll never know. No plugs. You guys know where to find us, and you know where to find me.
Absolutely, and you know where to find me as well. Hey, again, thanks so much for hanging out with us tonight. And again, if you have any feedback, please let us know. And if you like the format of the show better this way, please let us know that as well. We are always open to tweaks and changes moving forward. So again, if you have any suggestions for future topics, reach out to us on social media. And remember, everyone, whether it be board games or video games, never stop gaming.